Appliqué for handbags tends to be some large design that's really easy to stitch around. But what if you want to do something a little smaller, maybe a little more intricate, like this imperial cog? Then you either need a ton of patience or some embroidery technique. In this video, I'm going to show you how I was able to do this applique using my Cricut to cut out the vinyl and then use my embroidery machine to stitch it on. It takes a little longer, but I think my family will appreciate the fact that I didn't lose my cool last night. Anywho, let's get started. To give you some background, I basically was working on one of these awesome convention raiders. One of my bags, it's a little like motorcycle hip style bag, and I'm doing this for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It's actually up on auction using Tiltify. And I thought the next day, why don't I make one that's imperial also? So the problem is, I wanted to do the imperial cog on it with some other accent pieces, except that the accent pieces that I had and the black faux leather I had was PVC coated, which meant I couldn't laser engrave it like I did with the Rebel insignia. So basically, everything cut out great on the Cricut, except by the time I got to the stitching part, it looked horrible. It was all over the place, way out of whack, not terribly consistent in the spacing and how I did the corners. I think the one good decision I made out of the whole thing was to actually use my Janome HD9 instead of the Juki. And that's just because my Juki has a super big needle in it and is the DU1181N. Haha! Anyway, that just means it's super industrial and it eats fabric for dinner and second dinner. And bedtime snacks. First, I needed to make the image that I would use for tracing in Hatch Embroidery 3. I wanted it to be accurate in its placement given how detailed the imperial cog design was. Just note that this may be a touch overkill for your average applique. Anywho, I dragged in the PDF file of the Convention Raider pattern and selected the pages with the flat pattern pieces I would be embellishing. It's in 2 pieces, so I had to merge them together. The updated pattern releasing this summer will have the PNG and SVG files for craft and laser cutters. This won't be something you have to worry about in the future, at least for my pattern. I used the pen tool to trace the outline of the pattern piece, followed by adding the applique elements where I wanted them to be placed on the flap and exported it as a PNG file. I originally did all of this in Illustrator, but the PNG file output looked horrible when I used it as a artwork background in Hatch. Let's walk through the digitizing that needs to happen. If you want a detailed tutorial on how to use Hatch Embroidery 3, I'll leave a link in the description of the video. You're going to digitize in 3 distinct stages. The first stage will be a basting stitch around the border of the entire design so that you can reduce material waste and know exactly the amount of fabric to put down. I did this with a very generous 6mm stitch length, just a single run. The second stage will be a 3mm single run stitch to outline each of the applique elements. I also did a stitch outlining the pattern piece so that I could cut it out without having to fumble around with the pattern piece and worrying about a fussy cut. When you stitch this out, you'll use a thread color that matches your fabric, as these stitches might be visible under the edge of each cut. The third and final stage will be stitching the tack down of the applique elements. I was using vinyl for both the flap and the cutout fabric, so I stuck with a 3mm single run stitch. In retrospect, I think a triple run would have looked cool, but I was concerned about perforating the vinyl too much. My vinyl was made with PVC, so I couldn't laser cut it. I could, however, cut it with the Cricut Maker. The details in the imperial cog are just too high for me to sew it down with my machine, much less do a good cut by hand. I uploaded the art files I had for the individual designs and made sure to size them correctly before cutting. It's a heavier fabric, so when I went to cut, I made sure to use extra pressure on the rotary blade. I also used the fabric grip map so it wouldn't peel up while being cut. Now you're ready for all of the embroidery fun. First, you'll need to assign a thread to each of the thread colors, 1 per stage. They could be the same color thread if you want, but there need to be 3 distinct changes programmed in. Second, you'll place a stop command after each thread change. Some domestic machines expect that to be programmed into the design output. I prefer the way my Ricoma does it, where I have to manually enter it and it isn't baked into the design. Now you can let the machine run the first color, which will base the design's outline. Place down the base fabric using basting spray on the back of it to keep it from moving around. Make sure it's within that basted outline. Now you can stitch the second color to give you a guide for placing the applique cutouts. Spray the applique cutouts with the basting spray and then gently set them down, nudging them around to ensure that they are correctly placed on those guidelines. I have to emphasize how important this is. If you don't place it correctly, the stitches will be all over the place. Now you can do the final tack down stitch. As you can see from the results, the stitching is darn excellent. There's some areas where I could have paid better attention to placing the cutout on the Imperial cog, but in general, it looks darn good. It's definitely better than when I tried to potato through stitching it on my Janome, that's for sure. After all that's done, these are the results. It is a longer process, I absolutely admit that, but when I'm looking for a high quality return, or what if I wanted to do these in bulk, this is going to end up being faster in the long run. It's also a lot less prone to mistakes and the human element of it all. I think next time though, I might actually use the same thread color if I can hack it. However, I do actually kind of like the black standing out like that. Anywho, may the force be with you. Thank you for tuning in. Feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and all that cool fun stuff that everybody has to say at the end of a video because reasons.